Hello, everyone. Warm greetings from Williamstown, Massachusetts, and good evening to all of you in Berlin. In Phi Su, I'm honored to be participating asynchronously in this timely conversation organized by Bard College Berlin. When Dr. Marian Detjen first reached out about this exhibit, I was really keen to hear about the ways that students, artists, community organizers, and scholars were thinking with art and through art to address themes of memory, narrative, silences, and historiography. I was especially interested in these themes as they relate to questions around who belongs and whose presence and contributions are made invisible as part of a process of making nations, a process that's homogenizing. In that spirit, I'd like to offer you a peek at two pieces from the Williams College Museum of Art that I've been returning to over and over in my teaching and learning for a seminar I call Nowheres. The course interrogates nationhood, statehood, citizenship, and sovereignty, but from the perspective of places that don't appear as countries or states on the world map. These include, for example, Palestine, Somaliland, South Vietnam, and of course, the German Democratic Republic. The first image that I'm about to show you helps us to visualize the definition borrowed in the introduction to multidirectional memory of memory as the past made present. And a piece that I think does a really good job of helping us see this definition is a photo by Shimon Ati called Steinstrasse 22, Berlin. This features part of adjacent buildings with faded brick. And on the building's facade, as you can see, the artist has projected a black and white photograph taken at this location from the archives of images of Jewish communities before World War II. This photo raises questions about the afterlives of people and places that we might miss upon first glance, and also about the aims or intentions of specific memory projects. Here, the artist is threading together the past and present in one location in a really haunting way that shows continuity and ghosts that link the past and the present in this memory work. By contrast, the narrative projects that post-unification Germany undertook in the 1990s involved in many ways severing the histories of socialist migrations to the former East. And here, I'm appreciative of Bard College Berlin's exhibit subtitle, The 1990s Silencing of Migrants to the GDR. This active verb, silencing, reminds us that people engaged in a process of making silent, making invisible, the presence of migrant workers from Angola, Cuba, Mozambique, and other places to the German Democratic Republic. The silencing is part and parcel of state-making processes. To make a state is to make the nation, and to assume a perfect congruence between the two. This political principle, nationalism, demands a fit between nation and state, between people and place. Ideologues have, of course, marshaled this language of nationalism to say that internal enemies or various others who do not belong to the nation need to be cast out, whether by expulsion or elimination, as we saw with National Socialism, and as this photo so forcefully and poignantly captures. Present-day actors also continue to deploy nationalism to justify territorial expansion, as when Russia invaded Ukraine, supposedly to protect the interests of Russian-speaking peoples, members of the nation or the imagined nation who resided outside the formal boundaries of the state. But it's difficult to achieve symmetry between nation and state. Populations vary dramatically along ethnic, racial, linguistic, and religious lines, among others. And so when we do see homogeneous populations, they've resulted for the large part not from accidents of history or geography, but from mass displacement, violence, and genocide. Populations also mixed through bilateral agreements, as we know from the contract worker programs of the 1980s or other temporary migration programs around the world today. The goal of these programs might be temporary migration, but there's always leakage. And this is in part because people change when they cross borders. They become accustomed to certain practices, habits, politics, and in some cases, they invest in, decide, or attempt to establish families and build community. I'm keen to learn about narratives that recognize this leakiness of supposedly temporary programs and that see this leakiness not as a mismatch between nation and state, not as an aberration, but as a more accurate reflection of the diversity on the ground that is made invisible in order to tell a clean story about who counts as a member. It invites us to think, for example, about Mozambicans striking in opposition to unjust pay and poor workplace conditions, or about Vietnamese who mobilized after the fall of the Berlin Wall for rights to stay. So I hope to hear from the esteemed panelists in the conversation to follow from this keynote about asymmetries in silencing, that for many, these histories that dominant discourses treat as invisible were actually quite present, quite loud, quite visible. I'm interested too in conversations about how silencing and its opposite are ongoing projects. As we know from silencing the past, narratives are made of silences, not all of which are deliberate or even perceptible as such within the time of their production. So how do we trace where and when silences travel and where they fail? This leads me to the second image I'd like to share by Lourdes Rodriguez. It's called Territory State, and it features a watercolor and ink map that draws on cartographic conventions we're probably used to seeing. Lines of longitude and latitude, blue to depict water, and solid lines representing strict borders between political entities such as states. Canada appears here in the upper corner of the map, and what follows just south could conceivably be the mainland United States. But on closer inspection, we see that places that we don't expect to appear next to each other on a map do here. Manila Bay as part of the unincorporated territory of what I and many students initially mistook to be the United States. Just south of that, or below that, Subic Bay, a former US naval base, sitting alongside and bordering Guantanamo Strait, reminding us of the military detention camp also known as Gitmo. One way that students read this map then is as a way of threading together different sites of militarism and empire. And these are connections, possibilities that we miss when we take for granted a map of the United States that includes only the 48 contiguous states plus Alaska and Hawaii. I'm imagining a similar counter mapping that depicts what we understand or visualize as present-day Germany or historic East Germany, alongside and stretching into Angola, Cuba, Mozambique, Vietnam, and other sites of socialist exchange and migration flows. In that case, rather than tracing something like silence, migration, or states, we might do better to follow the deeds of men, as sociologist Zini Magubani implores, citing W.E.B. Du Bois. When we follow the actions and entanglements of folks of all genders, we gain a more accurate picture of the messiness of national projects. We also gain a fuller sense of how people carry ideas of nationhood and belonging with them across borders, and in the process, change the places they've come from and those they go to. So in line with the curatorial description of this evening's events, I'm interested in conversations that center the experiences of contract workers without assuming victimhood. More broadly, I'm excited to move beyond a binary of agency versus structure, resistance versus compliance. And instead, I'd like to hear about stories of complex personhood. about how individuals and communities negotiate internal tensions or borders within, about how former contract workers and the people who knew them expressed desire, humor, dare I say, joy amid structural discrimination, and about where folks carried, transplanted, and transformed these narratives of their role in the making of the GDR and present day Germany. So I'll wrap up here with thanks once more to Dr. Detjen for the invitation to join this conversation, and to the panelists for taking up some of these questions as you're able. I hope that the images I shared, along with my brief thoughts, will go a long way toward collapsing some of the distance in time and space between us today. And I look forward to following the rest of the conversation. Thank you.